Past midnight in the east wing, with the corridor lamps turned down to their lowest brass setting, and the polished mahogany doors all closed but one, I heard a number that was a lie. It came through the door of the steward's office, the one nearest the inventory room. The door was an inch off its frame. The voice inside was low, courteous, careful, and it said a figure for a piece of silver that I had walked past at evening inspection for 3 years, and the figure was wrong. It was wrong by about half. I knew the catalogue. I had stood by that catalogue most nights of my adult life. The piece was not worth what the voice was saying. The voice was naming it down on purpose, in front of someone who was being asked to believe the naming. My name is Guardsman Edric Pemberton of the Household Foot Guards of the House of Thornwell, and I am going to tell you about the 17 nights it took to bring down a man who had stolen from the king with a pen and a ledger and a polite handshake at the door. I never raised my rifle. I never raised my voice. I did the thing a guard is taught to do before he is taught anything else. I stood still. I listened. I remembered. And then, in the morning, I went to the only man in the building I trusted with what I had heard, and I let the system do the rest. That first night was the 11th of October. I was on the corridor watch from 10 until 6, the long east wing post that runs from the head of the back stair, past the steward's office, past the inventory room, past the small paneled antechamber where the household audit clerks worked in daylight, and ends at the locked oak door of the privy cabinet itself. It is a quiet watch. In 3 years on it I had stopped a footman with a wine bottle once, and a kitchen maid who had taken a wrong turning twice, and that was the whole of my excitement. The east wing past midnight is a corridor of closed doors, and the soft tick of the long case clock on the half landing, and the small click of my own boots on parquet when I walk the length of it every half hour, and nothing else. At 12 minutes past midnight that night I heard a chair move in the steward's office, and I stopped at the corner where the corridor turns, and I listened, because a chair moving in the steward's office at 12 minutes past midnight is not a thing that should happen. The steward kept hours like a banker. He was always gone by 7. The cleaning women came at 5 in the morning. Between those times the office should have been dark, and the door should have been locked, and the room should have been silent. The room was not silent. The door was not locked. A bar of warm lamplight lay across the polished parquet at my feet, the width of a finger, and I stood in that finger of light for a long moment, and I listened. There were 2 voices. One was the steward's. I had known the steward's voice for 3 years. Lord Brennan Holcombe, steward of the Privy Purse, had a voice like a soft tweed, agreeable and unhurried, the voice of a man who has never had to raise it because he has always been the man in the room with the keys. The other voice I did not know. It was a man's voice, a London voice, lower and rougher than Holcombe's, the kind of voice that has done business in a great many languages and is at home in none of them. He was being shown things. I could hear the small dry sounds of paper being turned, and the soft chink of a lid being lifted from a velvet-lined box, and Holcombe's voice naming items in the low, fluent murmur of a man reading from a list. The Marrowmere pair, Holcombe said. Enamelled miniatures, the late Queen's bequest, 1840, 2 of a set of 6. The other 4 remain catalogued at the Long Gallery. A pause, 1200. 1200, the other voice repeated slowly. The Marrowmere pair were not 1200. The Marrowmere pair were not 12,000. The whole set of 6 on the household inventory I had stood beside every evening of my watch was valued at £31,000, and the pair alone, being the 2 best of the 6, the 2 with the Queen's own cipher on the reverse, were worth nearer 15. I knew this because I had once, 3 winters ago, stood at the elbow of an insurance assessor for a full hour while he wrote out an updated schedule, and he had said the numbers aloud as he wrote, and I had stood at present arms and not moved and not forgotten. And the Hawk Salt Cellar, Holcombe went on, silver gilt 17th century, the smith's mark abraded but legible under glass, 60. 60. Cash naturally. Naturally. The Hawk Salt Cellar was a piece I dusted, with permission, on Sundays. It was 300 years old. It was the centerpiece of the great table on state nights. 600 would have been a quiet number for it. 60 was a number for a thing one buys at a fair from a man one does not trust. I stepped back from the bar of lamplight slowly, the way you step out of a room where a baby has just gone to sleep. I went to the end of the corridor, to the alcove where the long case clock stood, and I set my back against the wall in the deepest shadow it threw, and I held my post. I held it for 38 minutes. I heard 4 more pieces named at 4 more wrong prices. I heard the other man, the London voice, agree to all of them in the bored even tone of a buyer who has heard the price he was hoping for. I heard a leather case unsnap and the small papery whisper of banknotes being counted into it. I heard Holcomb say, "And the entry in the daybook," and I heard the other man say, "On loan to a private restorer." As before, and I heard Holcomb laugh, a short pleased laugh, the laugh of a man closing a door that had been left ajar. At 1 o'clock the door of the steward's office opened, and I stepped further back into the shadow of the alcove, and a man I had never seen before walked out of the office carrying a slim leather case, and behind him Lord Brennan Holcomb in his evening suit and a soft grey overcoat. Holcomb locked the door behind them slowly, with the small brass key on his watch chain. They walked together down the corridor, past my alcove without seeing me, and I heard the back stair door open and close, and then the corridor was empty and the lamps were low again, and the long case clock said 1 minute past 1 in its small dry voice. I did 3 things, then, in the order I had been taught to do them. I did not move from my post for the rest of the watch. I wrote down nothing. I remembered everything. A guard's memory is the only safe place. Anything you write may be found, anything you say may be repeated, anything you do may be seen. But what you remember, if you have been taught to remember, is yours alone until the moment you give it, and you give it once to the right man and you give it whole. At 6 in the morning, when the relief came, I handed off the post in the ordinary way, and I went down to the guardroom and I took off the bearskin and I drank a cup of tea standing up. And at 7:30 I knocked, in dress uniform, at the door of Captain Thaddeus Wren of the Household Guard, in his small office above the gatehouse. And when he said come in, I went in and I closed the door behind me and I asked him, very quietly, for a private hearing. Captain Wren was 41 years old. He had been my company commander when I was a recruit. He had a long, plain, weather-beaten face and the manner of a man who listens before he decides anything, and he was the only officer in the household for whom I would have laid down everything I had heard in the corridor and trusted that none of it would come back to me. I laid it down. I gave him the date and the hour and the bar of light at my feet. I gave him both voices. I gave him the Marrowmere pear at 1200 and the Hawk Salt Cellar at 60 and the 4 other pieces in the order I had heard them named. I gave him the soft chink of the velvet-lined box and the leather case unsnapping and Holcomb's small pleased laugh. I gave him the line about the daybook. I gave him the back stair at 1 o'clock and the slim leather case and the grey overcoat. I did not say what I thought it meant. He did not ask me. He let me speak until I had finished, and when I had finished he said, "Pemberton, sit down." I sat down. He took a sheet of paper out of his desk and a fountain pen and he wrote, in a hand so small I could not read it, for perhaps 6 minutes. Then he capped the pen. He folded the paper once. He put it in the inside breast pocket of his tunic. He looked at me. "You will say nothing of this to any man," he said. "You will keep your post as before. You will walk the corridor at the times you have always walked it. You will not look at the door of the steward's office. You will not slow as you pass it. You will not show, by the smallest change in your tread, that anything in this building is different to you this morning than it was yesterday. Do you understand?" "Sir." "If he meets again, you will hear him again. You will tell me in this office at this hour the next morning. You will tell me here. You will tell no man else. Not your sergeant, not your wife, not your father. Do you understand?" "Sir." He stood up. I stood up. He held out his hand and I shook it and he said, "Edric, you did the right thing. You will keep doing it. It will take time." It took 16 more nights. Holcomb met 4 more times, the 3rd of November, the 7th, the 11th, the 14th. I heard between those 4 nights 11 more pieces named at wrong prices and 3 different buyers' voices, and one quiet morning when Holcomb brought in a craftsman and discussed, in soft, careful sentences, the commissioning of replacement copies, for display purposes, you understand, while the originals undergo conservation, for 2 pieces undergoing no conservation any catalogue in the building knew about. He gave the craftsman dimensions and weights and the small particular details of the smith's marks. The craftsman, in the dry, careful voice of a man who had been asked this before, agreed to a delivery date and a price. I remembered. I went at 7:30 each following morning to Captain Wren's office, and I gave him everything, and he wrote in his small hand, and he said each time the same words: "Keep your post, say nothing, it will take time." On the 17th night, the 28th of November, I came on watch at 10, and at 5 minutes to 11 the corridor lamps were turned up to their normal evening brightness by a hand I did not see, and at 11 o'clock 4 men in plain dark suits walked up the east wing past my post without looking at me, unlocked the steward's office with a key I recognized as the Lord Chamberlain's own, went in, and closed the door. 10 minutes later Lord Brennan Holcomb was brought up the back stair by 2 house servants and a man in a quiet brown coat, shown into his own office, and the door was closed. At 11:20, Captain Wren walked the corridor in dress uniform with the Lord Chamberlain at his shoulder, and they went into the office and the door was closed. I stood my post. I did not look at the door. I did not slow as I walked past it on the half-hour. I heard in the long silence between my passes the small dry sounds of an audit being conducted, the snap of a ledger being opened, the rustle of pages, the murmur of Captain Wren's voice asking again and again very politely for the entry pertaining to a particular item on a particular date, and Holcomb's voice, smaller now, agreeable still but less tweed than wool, naming the entries he had written and the figures he had set against them. I heard the Lord Chamberlain once say, "Brennan," in the tone of a man who has known another man for 30 years and is now learning that he never did, and I heard after that no more from Holcomb at all. At 1 o'clock in the morning the door of the office opened, and Lord Brennan Holcomb was walked out of it between the two house servants, in his evening suit without the soft grey overcoat, and was taken down the back stair in the same quiet way he had taken his buyers down it, and the east wing of Thornwell House was, after that, a different building. I learned the rest in scraps in the months that followed. The 4 men in plain suits had been a clerk of the Lord Chamberlain's office, an outside auditor, the registrar of the Royal Collection, and a senior officer of the household police. The audit had begun the morning after my first conversation with Captain Wren, on the books going back 4 years, conducted entirely by hand, in a locked room 2 floors above the steward's office, by people Holcomb had no reason to suspect. The 11 pieces I had heard named were 9 missing from the long gallery, replaced on their plinths by skilled copies that had passed casual inspection but not the registrar's loop, and 2 sold outright with falsified loan entries in the daybook. The total came to a little over £240,000 of the king's silver and enamel, and the buyers were known by name within a week, and the craftsman was found at his workshop with the mould still on his bench. Holcomb did not stand trial in the public courts. He was tried quietly by a household commission, stripped of his office and his pension and his name on the register, and sent to live with a sister in a small town in the west where, I am told, he no longer goes out of doors. My name was not in any of it. Captain Wren had asked me on the morning after the 28th whether I wished it to be, and I had said, "Sir, no." He had said, "I thought not, it will not be." And it was not. The Lord Chamberlain knew. The King, I am told, was told. The Household Commission was told, and that for me was all the recognition I needed and more than I wanted. I went back to my corridor. I walked the east wing at the times I had always walked it. I stood at the corner by the alcove on the half-hour. I let the long-case clock keep me company. I dusted the hawk salt cellar, with permission, on Sundays. I will tell you the one thing I have kept from that winter which I have not told anyone in the 7 years since. On the morning after the 28th, when I had given Captain Wren my final account and was leaving his office, he stopped me at the door. He said, "Pemberton, you heard one wrong number on a quiet night and you stood still long enough to know it was wrong, and you brought it to a man who could do something with it. Do you know what most men do, in that corridor at that hour, when they hear what you heard?" I said, "Sir." He said, "They walk past. They walk past because it is easier, and because it is not their business, and because they are not paid to hear it, and because the man behind the door is more important than they are. They walk past, and the thing goes on, and the king is robbed for another 4 years, and one day the books catch it or they do not. Most men walk past." You stopped. I did not know what to say. I said, "Sir, it was the post." He looked at me for a long moment, the way an officer looks at a man he is going to remember. He said, "Edric, the post is a place. You are the man on it. The post does not hear." "You did, I have thought about that often on the long quiet nights since, when the east wing is dark and the doors are all closed and the lamps are low and the long case clock ticks on the half landing and I walk the parquet at the times I have always walked it. The post is a place. The man on it hears. And when he hears a thing he should not have heard, he does not move and he does not speak and he does not write it down. He remembers it. And in the morning, very quietly, he gives it to the right man and he goes back to his post, and the building stays a building, and the king keeps his silver, and the quiet wrong is put right by the quiet means the country has, for these things, kept ready. That is the whole of the story. There was no shouting, no rush of guards, no door broken in. No rifle raised. A man in a red tunic stood for 38 minutes in a finger of light in a corridor, and listened, and remembered, and walked in the morning up a flight of stairs to a captain's office, and said what he had heard. The rest was done by men whose names are not in this account, in rooms I never entered, by methods older than I am. I am 61 this year. I will retire next spring. I have stood my post in that corridor on and off for 19 of my 42 years in the regiment, and I will stand it for the few months I have left, and I will hand it on to the next man, and I will not tell him this story because he must hear his own wrong number on his own quiet night and decide by himself what kind of guardsman he is going to be. I think he will decide well. The post tends to teach a man in time. The Marrowmere pair are back on their plinth in the long gallery. The hawk salt cellar is on the great table on state nights. The steward's office has a new steward in it, a younger man, a good man, who keeps banker's hours and goes home at 7 and locks his door. The east wing past midnight is, once again, a corridor of closed doors and the soft tick of a clock, and the small click of my own boots on parquet when I walk the length of it every half hour and nothing else. I prefer it that way.